I'm Isabella Reyes, 27 years old. Until 3 months ago, I believed family came first, always. Then my acceptance into Columbia University's MFA program changed everything. What should have been the happiest day of my life became the beginning of my exile. My mother's words still echo in my mind. "You've ruined everything, Isabella. How could you be so selfish?" What she didn't know was that I had been secretly paying for Camila's application fees and tutoring her essays. For months, I'd spent years putting my dreams on hold, working 2 jobs while taking night classes, always making sure my younger sister had what she needed first. But when that acceptance letter arrived and Camila's rejection followed, none of that mattered. How do you choose between the family that raised you and the future you've sacrificed everything to reach? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To understand how everything fell apart so completely, you need to understand what my life looked like before that letter arrived. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Elmhurst, Queens, with my mother Elena and my sister Camila. The building was one of those pre-war brick structures with thin walls and thinner patience, where everyone knew everyone else's business whether they wanted to or not. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor, and every morning I'd wake to the sound of Mrs. Chen's television bleeding through the walls and the smell of her congee mixing with whatever Elena was cooking for breakfast. My room was barely large enough. For a twin bed and a desk I'd bought secondhand from a college student moving back home. But that desk was my sanctuary. On it sat my writing journal, a composition notebook with a black and white cover that had seen better days. The binding was cracked, pages threatened to fall out, and the corners were soft from years of handling. I'd filled 17 of these journals since high school, each one a chronicle of stories I observed, conversations I overheard, dreams I harbored in the quiet hours before dawn. I wrote about the woman on the subway who clutched her purse like a lifeline while reading romance novels. I wrote about the bodega owner who knew everyone's order by heart and asked about their families in 3 different languages. I wrote about the way light filtered through our kitchen window in the late afternoon, casting shadows that looked like ghosts of all the conversations we should have had, but never did. Elena worked as a medical assistant at a clinic in Flushing, taking the bus an hour each way because she'd never learned to drive. She'd immigrated from El Salvador when I was 3, and Camila was 1, and every decision she made carried the weight of that sacrifice. She spoke English perfectly now, but in moments of high emotion, Spanish would slip out in rapid-fire bursts that sounded like prayers or curses, depending on the situation. My mother was beautiful in that timeless way some women possess. High cheekbones, expressive dark eyes, and thick hair she wore pulled back in a neat bun for work. But there was always something guarded about her, as if she was constantly preparing for the next disappointment. She had opinions about everything: how we dressed, what we ate, who we spent time with, what we wanted to become. And her opinions weren't suggestions. Camila, 2 years younger than me, was Elena's clear favorite, though neither of them would admit it. Where I was quiet and observant, Camila was vivacious and demanding. She had our mother's beauty, but with an added sparkle that drew people in. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and somehow make it about her without trying. Growing up, I watched her charm teachers, neighbors, and potential boyfriends with an ease that seemed effortless. While I worked 2 jobs, barista at a coffee shop in Astoria in the mornings, and data entry clerk for an insurance company in Bauer, the evenings, Camila worked part-time at a boutique in Manhattan. She called it networking and building her personal brand, phrases she'd learned from Instagram influencers and YouTube videos about success. Elena never questioned why Camila's paychecks were smaller or why she could afford expensive clothes on a part-time salary. I never questioned it either, because keeping peace in our household was more important than fairness. My routine was rigid by necessity. Up at 5:30 a.m., coffee shop from 7 to 2, quick lunch, insurance office from 3 to 9, home by 10 if I was lucky. 3 nights a week, I'd take the subway to LaGuardia Community College for classes. It took me 6 years to get my associate degree, in English, taking 2 classes per semester, because that's all I could afford, and all my schedule would allow. The hardest part wasn't the exhaustion, or the constant juggling of responsibilities. It was the way my dreams felt theoretical, like something that happened to other people. I'd sit in those literature classes surrounded by 18-year-olds discussing their transfer plans to 4-year universities, their summer internships, their study abroad programs, and I'd feel ancient at 25. But I also felt determined in a way they couldn't understand yet. Every assignment I turned in, every essay I wrote, every discussion I participated in was proof to myself that I belonged in those rooms. It was in one of those community college classes that I met Mateo Rivera. He was auditing a poetry workshop, not for credit, just for love of words. While other students rushed out after class, Mateo would linger, asking the professor about meter and metaphor, about contemporary poets I'd never heard of. He had this way of listening that made you feel like your words mattered, like they were worth considering. Mateo was 3 years older than me, Cuban-American, with dark hair that curled at the edges and laugh lines that suggested he found joy in unexpected places. He worked nights at a bar in Long Island City and spent his days editing copy for small businesses and struggling writers. He lived alone in a studio apartment in Sunnyside, and when he talked about his life, it sounded like freedom. We became friends slowly, the way adults do when they're too tired and too cautious to rush into anything. Coffee after class turned into study sessions, which turned into long conversations about books we loved and stories we wanted to tell. He was the first person who took my writing seriously, who read my journal entries and saw potential instead of just diary musings. "You have a voice, Isabella," he told me one evening as we sat in a diner near campus, splitting a piece of pie and discussing a short story I'd written about a woman working multiple jobs to support her family's dreams. "You write about people like they matter, like their small struggles are worth examining." I remember laughing, embarrassed by the compliment. "Everyone has struggles. Mine aren't special." "But the way you see them is," he insisted. "The way you write about them is. You should apply to transfer programs, 4-year schools, maybe even graduate programs eventually." The idea seemed impossible then. Graduate school was for people with family support, with savings accounts, with time to dedicate to studying instead of surviving. But Mateo planted the seed, and over the following months, it grew into something I couldn't ignore. Elena had mixed feelings about my education. She was proud, in her way, but also suspicious. Education was important, she'd tell me, but not more important than family responsibility. She'd grown up poor in El Salvador, the daughter of a seamstress and a construction worker who died when she was 16. Education was a luxury her family couldn't afford, which made it both precious and potentially selfish in her worldview. "School is good, mija," she'd say, "but don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you come from." What she meant was, don't get ideas above your station. Don't think you're better than us. Don't leave us behind. Camila's relationship with my education was more complicated. She'd borrow my textbooks sometimes, flipping through them while I was at work, making notes in the margins. When I graduated with my associate degree, she was there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. But I also caught her looking at my diploma with something that wasn't quite celebration. "I should probably go back to school too," she mentioned, casually one evening while we were doing dishes. "Maybe we could take classes together." I encouraged her, helped her with her application to the same community college, even offered to help with tuition. But after one semester, she dropped out. "Too much work," she said. "Too many early mornings." The professors didn't understand her learning style. Elena was disappointed, but not surprised. "Camila has other talents," she'd say. "Not everyone needs to be academic." But when I started talking about transferring to a 4-year school, Suddenly, academic achievement became important again. Suddenly, Camila was interested in writing classes and literature programs. Suddenly, my path became our path. My dreams became family dreams. I should have seen it then, the pattern, the way my success was only celebrated when it could be shared, diluted, made safe. But I was too focused on the goal, too grateful for any support, to recognize manipulation. The Columbia application was something I did in secret initially. I'd heard about their MFA program from a professor at community college who thought I had potential. It seemed impossible. Columbia University, Ivy League, the kind of place that appeared in movies about smart people from wealthy families. But I researched it obsessively, reading about their faculty, their alumni, the kinds of stories they valued. It took me 3 attempts. The first application, I was rejected outright, not even a courtesy interview. The second time, I made it to the interview stage but didn't get in. Each rejection felt like confirmation that I was reaching too high, wanting too much. But I kept writing. I kept filling those composition notebooks with observations and stories and fragments of larger truths. I kept taking classes, working jobs, saving money for application fees. And somewhere in that routine, in the discipline of showing up for my own dreams even when they felt impossible, I found my voice. The third application was different. I submitted a portfolio that included the story about the woman working multiple jobs, the one Mateo had praised, along with pieces about immigrant families, about sisters who love each other but can't understand each other, about the weight of carrying other people's dreams alongside your own. When I submitted that final application, I didn't tell Elena or Camila. I couldn't handle their questions, their expectations, their plans for how my potential success should serve the family. I told only Mateo, who drove me to the post office and bought me coffee afterward to celebrate the act of trying, regardless of the outcome. But Camila found out somehow. Maybe she saw the application fee on my bank statement, or noticed me working, late on essays, or overheard me talking to Mateo on the phone. Instead of being hurt that I hadn't included her, she decided to apply too. "If you can do it, I can do it," she announced one evening over dinner. "We'll be Columbia students together. Wouldn't that be amazing, Mommy? Both your daughters at an Ivy League school?" Elena's eyes lit up in a way I'd rarely seen. The idea of both her daughters succeeding, of exceeding even her own dreams for us, transformed her from cautious supporter to enthusiastic champion. Suddenly, our Columbia applications became a family project. Suddenly, my dream became our dream. I helped Camila with her essays, just like I'd helped her with everything else over the years. I read her drafts, suggested revisions, even helped her brainstorm stories to include in her portfolio. It felt natural, the way it always had. Me clearing the path, her following behind, both of us moving toward something better. I should have known that sharing the dream would complicate the outcome. I should have known that in our family, my success was only acceptable if it didn't eclipse Camila's. But I was 27 years old, tired from years of work and school and sacrifice, and desperate enough for family support that I ignored every warning sign. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in March. I was working at the coffee shop when Elena called, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. At first, I thought something terrible had happened. Then I realized she was crying from joy. "Misha, it came. The letter from Columbia. You got in." I had to sit down in the break room, legs shaking, the reality hitting me in waves. Columbia, MFA, program, everything I'd worked for, dreamed of, sacrificed for. It was real. I left work early that day, taking the subway home with my heart pounding and my mind racing through everything that would change. Graduate school, new opportunities, a chance to focus entirely on writing for the first time in my adult life. When I walked into our apartment, Elena had already called our extended family, our neighbors, everyone she could think of to share the news. But Camila wasn't there. She was at work, Elena explained, and didn't know yet. We should wait for her to get home, Elena said. We'll celebrate together. I agreed, of course. That's what you do in a family. You wait, you share, you make sure everyone feels included. But I was already starting to feel uneasy, a familiar knot forming in my stomach that I'd learned to recognize as the price of peace. Camila came home at 8 that evening, tired from her shift and annoyed about subway delays. She saw the letter on the kitchen table immediately, saw Elena's excited face, saw my nervous smile. Is that from Colombia? She asked quietly. Isabella got in, Elena announced. Our Isabella is going to Columbia University. I watched Camila's face carefully, looking for genuine happiness, for celebration, for the sister I'd grown up with who used to cheer for me. What I saw instead was something more complicated, a flash of hurt, a tightening around her eyes, a smile that didn't quite reach the right places. That's amazing, she said, and hugged me, and I wanted to believe her. When do you find out, Isabella? Find out what? About financial aid, about whether you can actually afford to go. It was a fair question, but the way she asked it, like she was poking at a weak spot, testing whether my victory was real, made my stomach drop. I'll figure it out, I said. There are loans, work-study programs, ways to make it work. Of course there are, Elena chimed in. We'll figure it out together. This is good for the whole family. But even as she spoke, I could see Camila calculating something in her head. Later that evening, after Elena had gone to bed, Camila knocked on my bedroom door. Can I see the letter? She asked. I handed it to her, watching as she read every word carefully, studying the letterhead, the signature, the date. I should hear back from them soon, too, she said finally. Probably in the next few days. Probably, I agreed, though something in her tone made me uneasy. She handed the letter back and stood to leave, then paused in my doorway. Isabella? We're both going to get in, right? I mean, if they accepted you, they'll definitely accept me too. We wrote about similar things, and you helped me with my essays. They'll want both of us. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been avoiding for years. The assumption that my success was somehow hers too. The expectation that if I cleared a path, she would automatically be able to follow. The belief that we were a package deal, that my achievements were meaningless unless they could be shared. I hope so, Camila, I said quietly. I really hope so. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I wondered what would happen if hope wasn't enough. What would happen if, for once in our lives, I succeeded somewhere she couldn't follow? I didn't have to wonder for long. 3 days later, Camila's letter arrived. The letter was thin. That's the first thing I noticed when I came home from work that Friday afternoon and saw Camila sitting at our kitchen table, staring at the envelope like it might change its contents if she looked hard enough. Elena was standing behind her, one hand on Camila's shoulder, both of them frozen in a tableau of dread. It came, Camila said without looking up. Her voice was flat, hollow, in a way that made my chest tighten. I set down my bag and approached carefully, the way you might approach an injured animal. The envelope bore Columbia's familiar logo, but everything about the moment felt wrong. Where my acceptance letter had been thick with welcome packets and forms, this envelope looked like what it was, a polite dismissal. You haven't opened it. Yet? I asked gently. Camila shook her head. I know what it says. Thin envelopes are always rejections. Elena's grip on Camila's shoulder tightened. You don't know that, mija. Maybe they send different kinds of letters. Maybe... Mommy, stop. Camila's voice cracked. Just stop. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we couldn't say. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, that this wasn't the end of anything. But I also felt something shameful and small, a flicker of relief that my success hadn't been diminished, that for once, something was just mine. "Do you want me to open it?" I offered. Camila looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw years of competition and comparison crystallize in her expression. "No, I need to do this myself." She tore open the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the contents quickly, and I watched her face crumble in real time. The polite phrases, the encouragement to apply again, the standard language of academic rejection. I could see it all playing across her features. "We regret to inform you," she read aloud, her voice getting smaller with each word. "While your application showed promise, we received an unusually high number of qualified candidates this year." She didn't finish reading. The letter fluttered to the table as she buried her face in her hands and started crying. Not the pretty tears you see in movies, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. Elena immediately knelt beside her chair, pulling Camila into her arms like she was still a small child. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. This doesn't mean anything. There are other schools, other programs." But even as Elena comforted Camila, I caught her looking at me over my sister's head, and the expression in her eyes was something I'd never seen before. Not disappointment or sadness, but anger. Raw, undiluted anger directed at me, as if my acceptance had somehow caused Camila's rejection. Isabella helped me with my essays. Camila sobbed into Elena's shoulder. She read everything I wrote. "If I'm not good enough, then how did she get in? It doesn't make sense." The words hit me like a physical blow. The implication hung in the air. That either the admissions process was unfair, or that I had somehow cheated or been dishonest about the help I'd given her. "The essays were yours, Camila," I said quietly. "I just gave feedback. That's what people do. They help each other improve their writing." "But you know more than me," she continued, her voice muffled but audible. "You've been taking classes longer. You have more experience. You should have helped me more. You should have made sure I got in too." Elena's eyes sharpened as she focused on me. "Is that true, Isabella? Did you hold back when you were helping your sister?" The question was so unfair, so loaded with impossible expectations, that I felt momentarily speechless. How do you defend yourself against the accusation of not sacrificing enough? How do you prove that you gave everything you could without diminishing your own achievement? "I helped her as much as I could," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I read her drafts. I suggested improvements. I answered her questions. But the writing had to be hers. That's how applications work." "Maybe that's the problem," Elena said, her voice taking on an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. "Maybe you were thinking about yourself too much. Maybe you were protecting your own chances instead of really helping your sister." The accusation was breathtaking in its unfairness. For months, I'd spent evenings helping Camila brainstorm topics, revise sentences, polish paragraphs. I'd shared my own research about the program, my understanding of what they were looking for, my hard-won knowledge about academic writing. But none of that seemed to matter now. "That's not fair, Mommy," I said, using the childhood name I only pulled out when I was desperate to reach her. "You know I would never sabotage Camila. You know how much I care about her success." "Do I?" Elena stood up, still holding Camila, but looking at me with something close to disgust. "Because right now it looks like you got everything you wanted while your sister got nothing. And that doesn't feel like caring to me." Camila pulled back from Elena's embrace, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. When she looked at me, I saw something that broke my heart. Not just disappointment or sadness, but genuine hatred. "You knew," she said quietly. "Somehow you knew this would happen. That's why you applied in secret the first time. That's why you didn't tell us you were applying again until I found out. You wanted to keep it all to yourself. Camila, that's not... You never wanted me to apply, she continued, her voice gaining strength and venom. You just pretended to help because you had to, because it would look bad if you didn't. But you were always planning to be the only one who made it. The words were so far from the truth that I felt dizzy. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed, up late helping her revise essays when I should have been working on my own applications to backup schools. I thought about the application fee I'd paid for her when she was short on money. I thought about how genuinely excited I'd been at the possibility of us both getting in, both having something to celebrate together. But looking at my sister's tear-stained face, at my mother's accusatory glare, I realized that none of that mattered. In their eyes, my success had become theft. My achievement had become selfishness. My dream had become a betrayal. I wanted us both to get in, I said, desperately. I really did. I know how hard you worked, how much this meant to you. I never wanted it to happen this way. But it did happen this way, Elena said coldly. And now we have to deal with the consequences. The word consequences sent a chill through me. What do you mean? Elena looked between me and Camila, something calculating in her expression. I mean that families take care of each other. I mean that when one person succeeds and another person suffers, the successful person makes sacrifices to restore balance. What kind of sacrifices? I asked. Though I was beginning to understand where this was heading. You could defer, Camila said suddenly, sitting up straighter. Columbia lets people defer admission for a year, right? You could wait, and I could reapply with a stronger application. We could go together next year. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The suggestion hit me like a bucket of cold water. Defer my acceptance. Put my dreams on hold again. Wait another year while working dead-end jobs and watching my opportunity slip away. And for what? So that Camila could have another chance at something she might not get even with improved applications? I don't think that's realistic, I said carefully. Financial aid packages change from year to year, and there's no guarantee that reapplying would work out differently. But there's a chance, Elena jumped in. And shouldn't you be willing to take that chance for your sister? After everything this family has done for you? There it was. The guilt. The weaponized gratitude. The expectation that I should be endlessly thankful for a childhood and support that every child deserves. As basic human rights, as if my mother working to feed and house me was a debt I could never repay, rather than her fundamental responsibility as a parent. What has this family done for me? I asked quietly, and immediately regretted the question. Elena's face flushed, with anger. What has this family done for you? We fed you, clothed you, supported your education even when money was tight. We celebrated your achievements, encouraged your dreams. And this is how you repay us? By abandoning your sister when she needs you most? I'm not abandoning anyone, I protested. Going to graduate school doesn't mean I stop being part of this family. Doesn't it? Camila stood up, her tears replaced by something harder and more determined. You'll be living on campus, spending all your time with professors and classmates who think they're better than people like us. You'll be in a different world, Isabella. And what happens to us while you're there? You'll be fine, I said. But even as I spoke, I could hear how hollow it sounded. You'll figure out your own path. There are other schools, other opportunities. Not like Columbia, Camila shot back. Not like what you're getting. And you know, it. Elena moved to stand beside Camila, the two of them facing me like opposing counsel in a trial I didn't know I was on trial for. Here's what's going to happen, Elena said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when delivering ultimatums. You're going to call Columbia on Monday morning and tell them you need to defer your admission. You're going to spend this year helping Camila improve her application and reapply. And if she gets in next year, you can both go together. If she doesn't, you'll find a different program that accepts both of you. The demand was so outrageous, so completely unreasonable that I almost laughed. Almost. And if I don't? I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena and Camila exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes, some agreement they'd reached without me. If you don't, Elena said slowly, then I think you need to find somewhere else to live. Because I won't have someone in my house who puts their own selfish ambitions ahead of their family's well-being. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my mother, searching her face for any sign that she didn't mean it. That this was just emotional manipulation designed to scare me into compliance, but her expression was stone-cold serious. You're kicking me out? I whispered. I'm giving you a choice, she corrected. Your family or your precious Columbia. You can't have both. I looked at Camila, hoping to see some sign of protest. Some indication that she thought this was going too far. Instead, she nodded in agreement. It's only fair, Isabella, she said. If I can't have my dream, why should you get yours? The logic was so twisted, so fundamentally wrong, that I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. My sister's rejection had somehow become my fault. My success had somehow become a crime against the family. My dreams had somehow become theft from people I loved. I need time to think, I said finally. You have until Sunday night, Elena replied. That gives you the weekend to make your decision. Call Columbia Monday morning, or pack your bags Monday afternoon. I spent that weekend in a daze, going through the motions of normal life while my world crumbled around me. I worked my shifts at the coffee shop and the insurance office, came home to tense dinners where no one spoke directly to me, and lay awake at night staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. By Sunday evening, I knew what I had to do, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't see any other option that didn't destroy me completely. I knocked on Elena's bedroom door and waited for permission to enter. She was sitting on her bed, reading a magazine, but I could tell she'd been waiting for this conversation. I can't do it, I said without preamble. I can't defer Columbia. I can't put my life on hold for another year, maybe longer. I won't do it. Elena closed her magazine and looked at me with something that might have been sadness if I hadn't known better. Then you know what happens next, she said quietly. I know, I replied. And just like that, 27 years of family became history. Just like that, I became homeless for the crime of succeeding where my sister had failed. The only question left was where I would go. The first person I called was Mateo. It was 9 p.m. on Sunday night, and I was sitting on my bed surrounded by everything I owned that mattered. My composition notebooks, a few books, some clothes, and a framed photo from Camila's high school graduation where the three of us looked genuinely happy. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. Isabella? What's wrong? His voice was immediately alert, concerned in a way that made my throat tighten. I need to ask you a huge favor, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And I need you to know that it's okay if you say no. What kind of favor? I need a place to stay. Just temporarily, until I can figure out something more permanent. Elena kicked me out. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I started to panic. Maybe I was asking too much. Maybe our friendship wasn't as solid as I'd thought. Maybe. What happened? He asked quietly. I told him everything. Camila's rejection. The ultimatum, my refusal to defer Columbia, the impossible choice I'd been forced to make. Mateo listened without interrupting, and I could hear him moving around his apartment while I talked, the sound of cabinets opening and closing. I'm already making up the couch, he said when I finished. How soon can you get here? The relief was so overwhelming that I started crying again. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. Isabella, stop. You're not imposing. You're my friend, and friends help each other. Besides, my couch is pretty comfortable. I should know. I've fallen asleep on it enough times. I can pay rent, I said quickly. I know it's not much, but I can contribute something. We'll figure out the details later. Right now, just pack what you need and get over here. Do you want me to come help you move? I looked around my small room, at the life I was about to abandon, and shook my head even though he couldn't see me. No, I think I need to do this alone. But thank you, Mateo. Really, I don't know what I would have done. You don't need to thank me, he interrupted gently. Just get here safely, okay? After I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a few minutes, trying to process what was happening. In the space of 3 days, my life had been completely upended. I was about to become essentially homeless, estranged from my family, dependent on a friend's kindness. But I was also about to start graduate school at Columbia University, something I'd dreamed about for years. The juxtaposition felt surreal, triumph and devastation happening simultaneously. Success and loss intertwined so completely, I couldn't separate them. I started packing methodically, folding clothes into a duffel bag Elena had bought me for a high school trip to Washington, D.C. It felt wrong to take anything she'd given me, but it was the only luggage I owned. Each item I packed carried memories. The sweater Camila had borrowed and returned with a small stain she'd tried to hide. The books Elena had complained about because they took up too much space. The journal where I'd written my first story, about our family. The hardest decision was what to do with the photograph. It was from 3 years ago, taken at Camila's graduation from cosmetology school. We're standing in front of the institute, Elena in the middle with her arms around both of us, all three of us beaming at the camera. I look proud, Camila looks excited, and Elena looks genuinely happy in a way that seems impossible now. I stared at that photo for a long time, remembering the day it was taken. Elena had insisted we go to a nice restaurant afterward to celebrate, even though money was tight. Camila had done my makeup that morning, chattering excitedly about her plans to work in a high-end salon in Manhattan. I had brought flowers, daisies, Camila's favorite, and a card with a poem I'd written about sisters and dreams. That day, we felt like a real family. United, supportive, genuinely happy for each other's successes. Looking at the photo now, it was hard to believe we were the same people who had torn each other apart 3 days ago. I almost left it behind. It would have been easier, cleaner, to walk away from the visual reminder of what I was losing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was sentimentality, or maybe it was defiance. A refusal to let Elena and Camila rewrite our entire history because of one moment of crisis. I wrapped the frame carefully in a sweater and placed it at the bottom of my bag. The rest of my belongings fit into 2 bags, a duffel for clothes and personal items, and a canvas bag for my notebooks and books. 27 years of life reduced to what I could carry. It should have felt pathetic, but instead it felt strangely liberating. Everything I was taking with me was something I'd chosen, something that represented who I wanted to be, rather than who I was expected to be. Elena and Camila were in the living room watching television when I emerged from my bedroom with my packed bags. Elena looked up but didn't say anything. Camila kept her eyes fixed on the screen, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'm leaving now," I announced to the room in general. Elena muted the television but didn't turn around to face me. "Where are you going?" "To stay with a friend." "For how long?" The question felt like a trap. If I said permanently, it would confirm their narrative that I was abandoning the family. If I said temporarily, it might give them hope that I would change my mind about Columbia. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Elena finally turned to look at me, and for a moment I thought I saw regret flicker across her face. But then her expression hardened again. "You know this doesn't have to happen," she said. You could still call Colombia. You could still choose your family. I am choosing my family, I replied. I'm choosing the family I want to become, the life I want to build. But I can't do that here anymore. Camila flinched like I'd slapped her, but she still didn't look at me. Will you call? Elena asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that I hadn't heard since this all began. I don't know, I said again. Will you want me to? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. Part of me wanted to say something meaningful, to find words that might bridge the gap that had opened between us. But everything I could think of sounded either too angry or too desperate. I love you both, I said finally. That's never going to change no matter what happens. I left before either of them could respond. The subway ride to Mateo's apartment in Sunnyside took 45 minutes, plenty of time to second-guess every decision I'd made in the past 3 days. I stared at my reflection in the dark window and wondered if I was making a huge mistake. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should have been willing to sacrifice my dreams for family peace. But then I thought about the alternative, deferring Colombia, spending another year watching Camila struggle with applications she might not be ready for, living in a house where my success was seen as theft and my ambitions were treated as betrayal. The thought made me feel claustrophobic, like I was drowning in other people's expectations. Mateo was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, and seeing his familiar face almost made me start crying again. He took my bags without comment and led me upstairs to his studio apartment, a tiny but comfortable space with exposed brick walls, books everywhere, and a large window that faced east toward the city. Home sweet home, he said, gesturing toward the couch, which he'd already made up with sheets and a pillow. It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it. I set my bags down and looked around, trying to process that this small space was now my entire world. No family photos on the walls, no mother's cooking smells from the kitchen, no sister's music bleeding through thin walls, just quiet and space, and the overwhelming sense of starting over from nothing. Are you hungry? Mateo asked. I made some pasta earlier. There's plenty left. I realized I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. That sounds good. He heated up leftovers while I unpacked my few belongings, finding places for my books on his already overcrowded shelves and hanging my clothes in the tiny closet he'd cleared out for me. When I pulled out the framed photo, Mateo glanced at it but didn't comment. Your family? He asked simply. My former family, I said, placing it on the small table beside the couch. We ate dinner sitting on his floor, backs against the couch, sharing stories and trying to pretend this was just a normal evening between friends. But the elephant in the room was too big to ignore for long. How are you feeling? He asked when we'd finished eating. I considered the question seriously. Like I'm grieving something that isn't actually dead. Like I'm celebrating something that cost too much. Like I'm terrified and excited and guilty all at the same time. That sounds about right for a major life transition. Is that what this is? A transition? I laughed, but it came out bitter. It feels more like an explosion. Mateo leaned back, against the couch, studying my face. Sometimes explosions clear the way for new growth. Sometimes you have to destroy what isn't working before you can build what will. Did you read that in a fortune cookie? No. I learned it from watching you. His voice was serious now. Isabella, you've spent years, maybe your whole life, trying to make everyone else happy at the expense of your own dreams. What happened with your family isn't really about Colombia. It's about them not being able to handle you becoming the person you're supposed to be. I wanted to argue with him, to defend Elena and Camila, but I couldn't find the words, because somewhere deep down, I knew he was right. What if I'm making a mistake? I asked quietly. What if I'm destroying my family for something that might Not even work out? What if you're not? He countered. What if you're finally choosing yourself for the first time in your adult life? And that's exactly what you need to do. That night, lying on Mateo's couch and staring at the ceiling, I thought about the two paths that stretched out before me. One led back to Queens, to a family that would welcome me home if I gave up my dreams, to a life of predictable disappointment and familiar resentment. The other led forward into uncertainty, to Columbia and graduate school, and the possibility of becoming the writer I'd always wanted to be. Both paths came with a cost. The question was, which cost I could live with. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee brewing. Mateo was already dressed for work, moving quietly around the small kitchen. "Good morning," he said when he saw I was awake. "There's coffee, and I left some bagels on the counter. I have to leave for the office in a few minutes, but make yourself at home. We can talk more tonight." I sat up, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then reality crashed back. I was homeless, estranged from my family, and due to start graduate school in 5 days. "Mateo," I called as he gathered his things. "What if they try to contact me? Elena and Camila?" He paused in the doorway. "What do you want to happen if they do?" I thought about it. I don't know. Part of me hopes they will. Part of me hopes they won't. "Then trust your instincts when the time comes," he said. "You'll know what feels right." After he left, I sat in the quiet apartment drinking coffee and trying to plan my next steps. I needed to call my jobs and explain the situation, figure out student housing options at Columbia, navigate the financial aid process without family support. The list felt overwhelming, but also oddly exciting. For the first time in my adult life, every decision was entirely mine to make. I started with the practical things: calling work to request schedule changes, researching graduate student housing, reviewing my financial aid package. Each task felt like a small declaration of independence, a step away from the life I'd known towards something uncertain, but entirely my own. The hardest part was the silence from Queens. No calls, no texts, no signs that Elena and Camila were reconsidering their ultimatum. Part of me had hoped that once they had time to cool down, they might reach out to repair the damage. But as the hours passed, it became clear that they were as committed to this separation as I was. That evening, Mateo came home with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. "We're celebrating," he announced. "Celebrating what?" "Your freedom, your courage, your refusal to let other people's limitations become your own." We ate lo mein straight from the containers and drank wine from coffee mugs while I told him about my day of planning and preparation. For the first time since this whole crisis began, I felt something that might have been happiness stirring beneath the grief and uncertainty. "You know what the hardest part is?" I said as we finished the wine. "What?" I still love them. Elena and Camila, even after everything that happened. Even knowing they were wrong to ask me to give up Columbia, I still love them and miss them and wish things could be different. Mateo nodded. "That's not the hardest part, Isabella. That's the most human part. The fact that you can love them and choose yourself anyway, that's what makes you stronger than they think you are." I looked at the photo on the table beside me, at the 3 women who used to be a family, and felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, but it was mixed now with something else. Anticipation, maybe, or hope. In 3 days, I would start classes at Columbia University. I would begin the program I'd dreamed about for years, in a city full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I would be surrounded by people who shared my passion for words and stories, professors who could teach me things I'd never thought to learn. I would be alone, but I would also be free. For the first time since this journey began, that felt like a fair trade. Columbia University looked exactly like it did in the glossy brochures. Ivy-covered buildings, students with purposeful strides carrying messenger bags and coffee cups. The kind of intellectual atmosphere I'd imagined but never experienced. Walking through the gates for my first day of classes felt like entering a different world, one where my dreams weren't just acceptable but encouraged. My first workshop was taught by Professor Min-jae Choi, a soft-spoken Korean-American novelist, whose book I'd read 3 times while preparing my application. The classroom was in a basement of one of the older buildings, with high ceilings and tall windows that let in shafts of afternoon light. 12 students sat around a large conference table, each of us clutching folders and notebooks, trying to look like we belonged there. Writing, Professor Choi began without preamble, is the art of paying attention, not just to the big moments, but to the small ones. The way light falls across a kitchen table, the pause before someone answers a difficult question. The things people don't say that reveal more than what they do. I found myself thinking about Elena and Camila, about all the conversations we'd never had, all the words left unsaid. For 3 weeks since I'd moved out, there had been complete silence from Queens. No calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation. I'd started several messages to them myself, but deleted each one before sending. Professor Choi continued, "Your first assignment is to write about something you've lost, but I don't want you to write about the loss itself. I want you to write about the moment just before you knew it was gone." After class, I lingered in the hallway, overwhelmed by how much the assignment resonated with something I was still processing. A few other students chatted about their projects, their voices carrying the confidence of people who'd always believed their thoughts were worth sharing. "Isabella, right?" Professor Choi appeared beside me as the hallway emptied. "How are you settling in?" "It's wonderful," I said quickly. "Everything I hoped it would be." He studied my face with the same attention he brought to manuscripts. But I hadn't intended to say anything, but something about his quiet presence made me honest. "It's just different from what I expected. Not the program, that's perfect, but the circumstances. I'm here alone in a way I didn't plan to be." "Family issues?" Nodded, not trusting myself to explain without crying. "Writing can be a lonely profession," he said gently. "But it doesn't have to be an isolating one. The best writers find their tribe. People who understand that words matter, that stories can change things. Give yourself time to find yours." That evening, I returned to Mateo's apartment energized but exhausted. He was cooking dinner, something that smelled like garlic and herbs, and jazz music played softly from his old stereo. "How was the first day?" he asked, not turning from the stove. "Overwhelming, inspiring, terrifying." I collapsed onto the couch that had become my bed. "Professor Choi wants us to write about something we've lost." "Plenty of material there," Mateo said, but not unkindly. "That's the problem. I don't know if I'm ready to write about Elena and Camila yet. It's too fresh, too complicated." "Maybe that's exactly why you should write about it." I was considering this when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped. Maybe Elena had gotten a new phone. Maybe she was ready to talk. But when I opened the message, I saw it was from Camila. "Saw your photo on Columbia's Instagram. Living your dream while the rest of us deal with reality. Hope it's worth it." The message hit me like a physical blow. I showed it to Mateo, who frowned as he read. "She's following Columbia's social media?" he asked. "Apparently." I scrolled through Columbia's recent posts until I found it. A photo from orientation activities, me visible in the background talking to another student, looking genuinely happy, for the first time in weeks. "Block her," Mateo said immediately. "This is emotional manipulation, Isabella. She's trying to make you feel guilty for moving on with your life." "But maybe I should respond. Maybe this is her way of reaching out." "Look at the message again," he said firmly. "That's not reaching out. That's punishment." I read Camila's words again, feeling the sting of her sarcasm, the implication that my happiness was somehow selfish. I thought about responding, about trying to explain how hard this had been for me too, how much I missed them both. Instead, I blocked her number. "There," I said, showing Mateo the screen. "Done." But that night, lying in the dark on Mateo's couch, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo. I'd looked happy in it because I was happy. For those few hours during orientation, I'd been fully present in my new life instead of grieving my old one. Was that wrong? Was I supposed to be miserable to prove my love for my family? The next few weeks settled into a routine. Classes 3 days a week, work at the coffee shop and insurance office on my off days, evenings spent reading and writing in Mateo's apartment. Slowly, I began to feel like I might actually belong at Columbia. My classmates were friendly, my professors were encouraging, and my writing was improving in ways I could feel but couldn't quite articulate yet. The assignment about loss turned into a story about 2 sisters sharing a bedroom, the older one leaving for college while the younger one stayed behind. I wrote about the night before departure, the way familiar objects look different when you knew you were seeing them for the last time. Professor Choi's feedback was encouraging. He said I had a gift for capturing complex emotions in simple moments. But just as I was starting to feel settled, Elena made her move. It started with a phone call from my tia Carmen, Elena's sister, on a Thursday evening in October. "Mija," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Your mother asked me to call you." My heart rate immediately spiked. "Is everything okay? Is someone hurt?" "Everyone is fine. But your mother, she's been having a hard time. She misses you, Isabella. She wants to talk." "Then why didn't she call me herself?" Tia Carmen sighed. "You know how stubborn your mother is. She's hurt, and she's proud, and she doesn't know how to make the first move. But she's also worried about you. She heard you're living with a man." "I'm staying with a friend," I corrected quickly. "I know, Mija. I'm just telling you what she heard. She's concerned about your reputation, about your safety. She wants to know if you need money for your own place." The offer was tempting. I'd been sleeping on Mateo's couch for 6 weeks, and, while he'd never complained, I knew it couldn't be comfortable for either of us long term. But I also knew Elena well enough to recognize the strings that would come attached to any financial help. "What does she want in return?" I asked. "She wants to see you. She wants to talk. She says maybe you can work something out." "About Columbia?" Another sigh. "I think she's realizing she may have been too harsh. Camila has been difficult since you left. Crying a lot, not working much, blaming Elena for driving you away. Your mother is starting to see that maybe the problem isn't just you." This was the opening I'd been hoping for, the sign that Elena might be ready to accept my choices. But something about the conversation felt off, too orchestrated. "Tia Carmen, did Elena ask you to say all of this?" "Some of it," she admitted. "But Isabella, I've seen your mother cry more in the past month than in the past 10 years. Whatever happened between you 3, she loves you, and I think she's ready to find a way to fix it." That weekend, I took the subway back to Queens for the first time since I'd left. The familiar sights, the bodega where I bought my morning coffee, the park where Camila and I used to walk as children, the apartment building that had been home for most of my life, felt strange, like locations from a movie I'd seen years. Ego Elena was waiting for me in the lobby, dressed in her good clothes as if this were a formal occasion. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, and when she hugged me, I could feel how tightly she was holding back tears. "Mija," she whispered into my hair, "I've missed you so much." The apartment looked exactly the same, but felt different. Camila wasn't there. Elena explained she was working, and the space felt too quiet, too empty. "You look good," Elena said, as we sat in the kitchen where we'd had our confrontation 6 weeks earlier. "Thin, but good. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mommy. Mateo takes good care of me." Elena's face tightened slightly at the mention of Mateo. "About that, Isabella, people talk. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs saw you in the neighborhood last month with a man. She said you looked very comfortable together." "Mateo is my friend," I said firmly. "Nothing inappropriate is happening." "I'm not judging," Elena said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I just worry about appearances, about what people think. You're a young woman living alone with a man who isn't your husband." "I'm 27, Mommy, and I'm not living with him permanently. I'm looking for my own place. That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Elena's voice became warmer, more persuasive. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about the things I said. Maybe I was too hasty, too emotional." Hope fluttered in my chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we can find a compromise. You can come home, continue your studies at Columbia, and we can be a family again. I know how important your education is to you." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "What about Camila?" I asked. "Is she okay with this?" Elena's expression shifted slightly. "Camila is adjusting. She's been having a hard time since you left. She applied to some other schools, but nothing has worked out yet. She's feeling lost, rejected." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "But Elena, if I come home, what changes? What's different from before?" "You can keep going to Columbia," Elena said quickly. "I won't ask you to defer anymore. I realize that was unfair." "And Camila? How does she feel about me being successful? When she's struggling?" Elena hesitated. "She's learning to accept it. But Isabella, she needs you. She looks up to you, even if she doesn't always show it. She needs her big sister to help her figure out her next steps." There it was, the catch, the expectation that my return would come with obligations to manage Camila's emotions and guide her future. Coming home wouldn't just mean resuming my old life. It would mean taking on additional responsibilities as Camila's emotional caretaker. "What kind of help?" I asked carefully. "Just support, encouragement. Maybe help her look at other programs, other opportunities. You're so good at research, at writing applications. She could use that guidance." I thought about the months I'd already spent helping Camila with her Columbia application, the time and energy I'd invested in her success. How much more of my life was I expected to dedicate to managing her disappointments? "Mommy," I said slowly, "I love Camila, and I want her to be happy, but I can't be responsible for her career decisions or her emotional well-being. That's not fair to either of us." Elena's face fell. "So you won't help your own sister?" "I'll support her, encourage her, celebrate her successes. But I won't put my own life on hold to manage hers. I can't do that anymore." The conversation went downhill from there. Elena's conciliatory tone disappeared, replaced by the familiar guilt and manipulation. Why was I being so selfish? Didn't I care about family? Had Columbia changed me so much that I'd forgotten where I came from? By the time I left an hour later, it was clear that nothing had really changed. Elena's idea of compromise was me resuming my old role as family caretaker while pursuing my own dreams on the side. She wasn't ready to accept that I had become someone who put her own needs first, someone who couldn't be guilt-tripped into endless sacrifice. But something else happened during that visit that changed everything. While Elena was in the bathroom, I noticed a box of papers on the kitchen counter, documents that looked official, with Elena's name on them. Curious, I glanced at the top page and froze. It was an application to Columbia University's MFA program, dated 1997. Elena's application, from 28 years ago, when she would have been about my age. The personal statement was in her handwriting, passionate and articulate, describing her love of literature and her dreams of becoming a writer. Attached to the application was a rejection letter. I stared at the papers, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Elena had applied to the same program I was now attending. She'd had the same dreams, the same ambitions, and she'd been rejected. Suddenly, her reaction to my acceptance made terrible sense. It wasn't just about Camila's disappointment or family loyalty. It was about Elena's own unfulfilled dreams, about watching her daughter succeed where she had failed. When Elena returned to the kitchen, she saw me holding the application and went very still. "Where did you find that?" she asked quietly. "It was on the counter." "Mommy, why didn't you ever tell me you applied to Columbia?" Elena sat down heavily, looking older than her 52 years. "Because it was a long time ago. Because it didn't matter." "It matters now," I said. "It explains everything. You're not really angry at me for succeeding. You're angry because my success reminds you of your own disappointment." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand what it was like, Isabella. I was young. I had dreams. I thought I could be a writer. But then I got pregnant with you, and your father left, and everything changed. I had to choose between my dreams and my responsibilities. So you chose responsibility. I chose my children," she corrected fiercely. "I chose to make sure you and Camila would have opportunities I didn't have. And now you're throwing those opportunities back in my face." "I'm not throwing anything back. I'm grateful for everything you sacrificed for us. But Mommy, your dreams dying doesn't mean mine have to die too." Elena wiped her eyes, composing herself. "It's different for you. You don't have children depending on you. You don't have the same responsibilities." "No, I don't. And that means I get to make different choices." "That's not a betrayal of you. It's a fulfillment of what you worked to give me." We sat in silence for a moment. Two women separated by a generation and a chasm of misunderstanding. "I wanted to be proud of you," Elena said finally. "I am proud of you. But it hurts, Isabella. Watching you get everything I wanted and couldn't. It hurts." "I know," I said softly. "And I'm sorry for that pain. But I can't fix it by giving up my own dreams." That conversation stayed with me for days. Back in Mateo's apartment, staring at the ceiling each night, I tried to process the complexity of what I'd learned. Elena's anger wasn't just about family, dynamics, or favoritism. It was about her own grief for the life she'd never been able to live. Understanding that didn't make her behavior acceptable, but it made it human. She wasn't a villain trying to destroy my happiness. She was a woman struggling with her own regrets and disappointments. "It doesn't change anything," Mateo said when I told him about Elena's application. "Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to accept being hurt." "But it makes me feel differently about her," I admitted. "More sympathetic." "Sympathy is fine," he said. "Just don't let it become self-sacrifice again." That night, I started writing a new story for workshop. Not about the sisters sharing a bedroom, but about a mother and daughter who both dream of the same future, separated by a generation and a rejection letter. Professor Choi's assignment had asked us to write about something we'd lost, and I realized I'd been thinking about it wrong. I hadn't lost my family because of my success. I'd lost the illusion that their love was unconditional, that their support didn't come with strings attached. I'd lost the fantasy that I could have both my dreams and their approval. But losing illusions, I was beginning to understand, wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it was the first step toward finding something real. I couldn't stop thinking about Elena's application. For 3 days after finding it, I replayed every interaction we'd had since my acceptance letter arrived, reframing, each moment through this new lens. Elena's rage wasn't about family loyalty or Camila's feelings. It was about her own buried dreams clawing their way to the surface. I needed to see more. So I did something I'm not proud of. I went back to Queens when I knew Elena would be at work, using the spare key I'd never returned to search through her belongings. The apartment felt different in the middle of the day, quieter and somehow smaller. Camila was out, at another job interview according to the note on the refrigerator, which gave me the privacy I needed for what felt uncomfortably like breaking and entering. Elena's bedroom was neat and sparse, the same furniture she'd had since I was a child. But tucked in the back of her closet, behind winter coats and old shoes, I found a cardboard box marked personal documents in her careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was Elena's entire academic history, transcripts from the University of San Salvador, where she'd studied literature before immigrating, English proficiency test scores, community college certificates, and at the bottom, a thick folder labeled Columbia University. The folder contained everything: multiple drafts of her personal statement, letters of recommendation, a portfolio of short stories and essays she'd written, and correspondence with the admissions office spanning 2 years. Elena hadn't just applied to Columbia once. She'd applied 3 times, just like I had. The rejections were all there, each one more devastating than the last. But it was her writing that broke my heart. Elena's stories were raw, powerful, achingly beautiful. She wrote about immigration, about single motherhood, about dreams deferred and dreams dying. One story, titled Las Manos de mi Madre, was about a seamstress who gives up her own artistic ambitions to ensure her daughter can go to art school. Another explored the hidden costs of immigration, not just language barriers, but the deeper losses of identity and possibility. Elena was a gifted writer. Her voice was distinct, her observations sharp, her emotional insight profound. Reading her work, I understood why her rejection from Columbia had been so devastating. She hadn't just been denied admission to a program, she'd been told that her voice, her experiences, her dreams weren't valuable enough. At the bottom of the folder was a letter I almost missed, handwritten in Elena's precise script but never sent. The envelope was addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks after my acceptance letter had arrived. Mi querida Isabella, I am writing this letter I will probably never give you, because there are things I need to say even if I can never say them out loud. When you got into Columbia, I should have been proud. Instead, I became someone I don't recognize, angry, jealous, small. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault, punished you for achieving something I never could. The truth is that Columbia was my dream first. 28 years ago, I applied to the same program you're entering now. I was young, full of hope, convinced that my stories about our people were worth telling. I was wrong. They rejected me 3 times. After the 3rd rejection, I put away my notebooks, my dreams, my belief that I could be anything more than what circumstances had made me. I focused on being a good mother, on making sure you and Camila would have the opportunities I didn't have. But when your letter came, when I saw you holding that acceptance I had dreamed of for so many years, all the pain I thought I had buried came rushing back. For one terrible moment, I hated you for succeeding where I had failed. I know that makes me a bad mother. I know that asking you to defer was wrong. But Isabella, I was drowning in my own regrets, and I pulled you down with me. I hope you become the writer I never could be. I hope someday you can forgive me for being too small to celebrate your dreams the way they deserve to be celebrated. Tu madre que te ama. Elena. I sat on Elena's bedroom floor, clutching the letter and crying harder than I had since this whole ordeal began. Not just for myself, but for Elena. For the young woman who'd had dreams as big as mine, who'd worked just as hard, who'd been just as passionate about writing and literature. I understood now why she'd reacted so violently to my acceptance. It wasn't about Camila's disappointment. It was about Elena watching her daughter walk through a door that had been slammed in her own face decades ago. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly shoved everything back into the box, my heart pounding. But it was just Mrs. Rodriguez from next door. Still, the close call reminded me that I was trespassing. I put the box back exactly where I'd found it, but I couldn't put the letter back. Elena had written it for me, even if she'd never intended to give it to me. The subway ride back to Sunnyside felt eternal. I kept pulling out my phone to call Elena, but what could I say? That I'd broken into her apartment and discovered her secrets. Mateo was home when I arrived, grading papers at his kitchen table. He took one look at my face and put down his pen. "What happened?" he asked. I told him everything: the break-in, the box, Elena's stories, the letter. I read him passages from Elena's writing, explaining how talented she was, how devastating her rejections must have been. "She's a beautiful writer," I concluded. "She could have been really successful if circumstances had been different." Mateo listened without interrupting, but when I finished, his expression was troubled. "Isabella," he said carefully, "what are you thinking right now?" "I'm thinking that I understand Elena now. I understand why she reacted the way she did, why my success felt like such a betrayal to her. And I don't know what to do with that understanding." Mateo moved to sit beside me on the couch. "Let me ask you something. Does understanding Elena's pain change the fact that she hurt you? Does it change the fact that she tried to manipulate you into giving up your dreams?" "No," I admitted, "but it makes it more complicated." "How?" "Before, I could be angry at Elena for being selfish, but now I know she understood perfectly what she was asking me to give up, because she'd given up the same thing herself." "That makes it worse, not better," Mateo said firmly. "If Elena knew how devastating it was to lose that dream, then asking you to sacrifice yours was even more cruel. But she was in pain, Mateo. She was drowning in regret and disappointment." "Yes, they do. But Isabella, you can't heal Elena's wounds by reopening your own. You can't fix her broken dreams by breaking yours." I wanted to argue with him, but deep down I knew he was right. Understanding Elena's motivation didn't erase the damage she'd done. "What do I do with this?" I asked, gesturing to the letter. "What do you want to do?" "I want to call her. I want to tell her I understand, that I forgive her, that we can find a way to move forward. But I'm afraid that understanding will turn into enabling. I'm afraid I'll end up sacrificing my dreams to heal her regrets." Mateo nodded. "What would it look like if you reached out to Elena without sacrificing yourself?" I thought about it. I could acknowledge her pain without taking responsibility for fixing it. I could express empathy without accepting blame. That sounds healthy. It also sounds impossible. That night, I lay awake thinking about Elena's letter, about the young woman she'd been when she applied to Columbia, about the dreams she'd buried to become the mother Camila and I needed. Elena had sacrificed her writing career to raise us, and in her mind, we owed her the same sacrifice. But that logic was flawed. I could honor Elena's sacrifice without replicating it. I could appreciate the opportunities she'd given me without feeling guilty for taking them. The revelation about Elena's past changed everything and nothing. It explained her behavior without excusing it. But it also gave me something I hadn't expected: permission to succeed without apology. If Elena had truly wanted her daughters to have the opportunities she'd missed, then my success at Columbia was exactly what she'd worked for. The next morning, I sat down at Mateo's kitchen table and began writing a letter of my own. "Dear Mommy, I found your letter. I also found your stories, your applications, your rejections. I know about Columbia now, about your dreams, about the career you gave up to raise Camila and me. Your writing is beautiful, powerful, important. The world lost something when you stopped sharing your voice. But Mommy, I can't fix your disappointment by destroying my opportunities. I can't heal your wounds by reopening them in myself. I can't honor your sacrifice by making the same one. You raised me to be strong, independent, ambitious. Columbia isn't a betrayal of those lessons. It's proof that they worked. I love you. I miss you. I want you in my life. But I won't give up my dreams to earn back your approval. If you can't celebrate my success without comparing it to your disappointments, then we'll have to love each other from a distance until you can. Your daughter who loves you, Isabella. I sealed the letter before I could second-guess myself and walked to the nearest mailbox. Standing on the street corner where I'd mailed my Columbia applications years earlier, I felt a strange sense of completion. I didn't know what kind of story mine would be. But for the first time since this all began, I was okay with either ending. 3 weeks after I mailed the letter to Elena, Professor Choi made an announcement that changed everything. "The semester is ending with our annual graduate student reading," he said during workshop. "It's an opportunity to share your work with the broader Columbia community, faculty, students, families, literary community members. Each of you will read for 10 minutes from your strongest piece this semester." My stomach dropped. A public reading meant potential recognition, validation, the kind of academic achievement that could open doors to publications and fellowships. It also meant inviting people to celebrate with me, and the only people I wanted to invite were the ones who'd made it clear my success wasn't welcome. "The reading is in 3 weeks," Professor Choi continued. "I'll be sending invitations to your emergency contacts and family members listed in your files, unless you specifically ask me not to." After class, I lingered in the hallway, my mind racing. Elena and Camila were still listed as my emergency contacts from my initial application. Would Professor Choi's invitation reach them? Did I want it to? "Isabella." Professor Choi appeared beside me. "You look troubled." "The family invitations," I said. "It's complicated with my family right now." He studied my face with that careful attention he brought to everything. "Would you prefer I not send them?" I thought about Elena's letter, about her dreams of being exactly where I was now. "No," I said finally. "Send them. They deserve to know about this, even if they choose not to come. And if they do come, then I guess we'll see what happens." That evening, I called Mateo from Columbia's library, where I'd been working on my reading selection. He was at the bar, and I could hear the familiar sounds of clinking glasses and quiet conversation in the background. "I need to ask you something," I said without preamble. "Shoot, will you come to my reading? As my family?" The pause was brief, but meaningful. "Of course, but Isabella, what about—" "Elena and Camila might come too, or they might not. Either way, I need someone there who's proud of me without conditions." "You have that," he said simply. "You've always had that." After hanging up, I sat in the library stack surrounded by books and tried to choose which story to read. I had several strong pieces from the semester: the story about sisters sharing a bedroom, a piece about immigrant mothers and their American daughters, and a newer story inspired by Elena's hidden applications. But there was another piece. One I'd been working on privately. That felt like the most honest thing I'd written. It was about a family that falls apart when one member succeeds, about the complicated love between mothers and daughters, about the weight of carrying other people's dreams alongside your own. It was raw, personal, potentially painful for anyone who might recognize themselves in it. It was also the best thing I'd ever written. I made my decision and emailed Professor Choi my selection, then started preparing for what felt like the most important 10 minutes of my life. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of revision, memorization, and anxiety. I practiced reading the story aloud in Mateo's apartment, timing myself, working on pacing and emphasis. Mateo listened patiently to countless iterations, offering feedback and encouragement. "You're overthinking it," he said one evening, after I'd read the same passage 5 different ways. Just tell the story like you're telling it to a friend. Your voice is what makes it powerful. What if Elena comes and hates it? What if she thinks I'm exploiting our family drama for academic points? What if she comes and finally understands that your art matters? What if she recognizes herself in your words and realizes that you inherited your talent from her? I wanted to believe that was possible. But as the reading approached, I heard nothing from Elena or Camila. No response to my letter. No acknowledgement of Professor Choi's invitation. No sign that they even knew about the event. 5 days before the reading, I made a decision that surprised even me. I picked up the phone and called Elena directly. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Isabella? Hi, Mommy. The childhood name slipped out automatically. I wanted to tell you about something. Columbia is having a student reading next Friday night. I'm going to be reading one of my stories. Silence stretched between us, filled with everything we hadn't said to each other. You got my letter? I continued. I know you did, because I know you would have called if you hadn't received it. I got it, Elena said quietly. And I don't know what to say, Isabella. You wrote things. You said things that made me think. Good. That's what writing is supposed to do. Another pause. This reading, it's important? Very important. It could lead to publication opportunities, fellowship applications, connections in the literary world. The kind of opportunities I never had, Elena said, and there was something different in her voice. Not bitterness, but acknowledgement. Yes. Will, you read something about us? About our family? The question caught me off guard. Would that bother you? I don't know. Maybe. But Isabella, you're a writer. Writers write about their lives, about the people who shaped them. I've been thinking about that since I read your letter. I'd like you to be there, I said, my heart pounding. Both you and Camila. I know things are complicated between us, but this is something I've worked toward my whole life. I know, Elena said softly. I'll talk to Camila. And Mommy? Whatever. You decide. I understand. But I won't change what I'm reading, and I won't apologize for my success anymore. I wouldn't expect you to, she replied, and hung up. The conversation left me shaken and hopeful in equal measure. I called Matteo immediately. She might come, I told him. They both might come. How do you feel about that? Terrified, excited, like I might throw up. That sounds about right for a major life moment. 3 days before the reading, I started seeing a therapist. It was something I'd been considering for weeks, but Elena's potential attendance made it feel urgent. I needed professional help processing the complexity of my family situation before I faced them in public. Dr. Nora Delgado was a warm, direct woman in her late 30s who specialized in family trauma and immigrant identity issues. Her office was in a brownstone near campus, filled with books and plants and comfortable chairs that invited honesty. Tell me about your family, she said during our first session. I told her everything. The ultimatum, the move to Matteo's apartment, Elena's hidden applications, the reading invitation, the complicated love that existed alongside deep hurt. What do you want from your relationship with your mother? Dr. Delgado asked. I want her to be proud of me. I want her to see my success as proof that her sacrifices mattered, not as proof that life is unfair. And what do you think she wants? I considered. This. I think she wants to go back in time and apply to Columbia when she was my age, knowing what she knows now. I think she wants her own dreams back. But that's not possible. No, it's not. So what is possible? Maybe we can both be writers. Maybe my success doesn't have to erase hers. Maybe there's room for both of us to have literary dreams. Dr. Delgado nodded. How might that look? I don't know yet, but maybe that's what I need to find out. The day of the reading, I woke up with a stomach full of butterflies and a head full of doubts. I'd chosen to read The Weight of Dreams, the story about family dynamics and inherited trauma. It was 12 pages long, which I'd have to condense to fit the 10-minute limit, but it felt like the most honest representation of my voice as a writer. Mateo made me breakfast and coffee, talking me through my pre-performance nerves like he was coaching an athlete. "Remember," he said as I gathered my things, "you belong here. You earned this. Your story deserves to be heard." What if no one understands it? What if it's too personal, too specific to my experience? The best stories are specific and universal at the same time. Trust your instincts. The reading was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the main lecture hall, a beautiful space with high ceilings and excellent acoustics. I arrived an hour early to practice with the microphone and settle my nerves. Other students were doing the same, each of us lost in our own pre-performance rituals. By 6:45, the hall was filling with people: families, friends, faculty members, students from other programs. I scanned the crowd from backstage, looking for familiar faces. Mateo was there, sitting in the third row with an encouraging smile. Professor Choi was introducing the evening to the gathering crowd, but there was no sign of Elena or Camila. Tried not to feel disappointed. I'd known there was a chance they wouldn't come, that the distance between us was still too great to bridge with a single phone call. But I'd hoped. Despite everything, I'd hoped. "Isabella?" Another student touched my arm. "You're third, right after Maria." I nodded, trying to focus on my breathing, on the words I'd memorized, on the story I was about to share with a room full of strangers. Then, just as Professor Choi called the first reader to the podium, I saw them. Elena and Camila, standing at the back of the hall, looking uncertain and out of place, but undeniably present. Elena was wearing her good dress, the navy one she saved for special occasions. Camila had done her hair and makeup carefully, the way she did when she wanted to make a good impression. They had come, against all odds, despite all the hurt and anger and complicated history between us. They had come to hear me read. I caught Elena's eye across the crowded room and saw something I hadn't seen in months. Not approval exactly, but presence, attention, a willingness to witness this moment that mattered to me. Whatever happened in the next hour, whatever came after this night, they were here. My family was here to see me step into the life I'd chosen, the dreams I'd refused to abandon. It was more than I'd dared to hope for, and exactly what I needed. The first two readers were excellent: a poet who wrote about growing up undocumented, and a fiction writer whose story about gentrification in Brooklyn made the audience gasp at its conclusion. I barely heard them. My attention kept drifting to the back of the room where Elena and Camila sat, their faces unreadable in the dim lighting. "Our next reader is Isabella Reyes," Professor Choi announced, and my stomach dropped to my feet. Isabella is reading from The Weight of Dreams, a story that exemplifies the kind of fearless, authentic voice we hope to nurture in our program. I walked to the podium on unsteady legs, my printed pages shaking in my hands. The microphone felt too close to my mouth, the lights too bright, the silence too expectant. I could see Mateo in the third row, giving me an encouraging nod. I could see Professor Choi watching with the expression he wore when he was particularly invested in a student's success. And I could see Elena and Camila, still standing at the back like they might need to make a quick escape. "The Weight of Dreams," I began, my voice finding strength as I spoke, by Isabella Reyes. The story opened with a scene I knew Elena would recognize: a mother and daughter in a kitchen, arguing over college applications while dinner burned on the stove. But I'd fictionalized it enough to create distance, made it universal enough that anyone who'd ever felt caught between family loyalty and personal ambition might see themselves in it. Marta had been filling out applications in secret for months, I read. Not because she was ashamed of her dreams, but because she knew that in her family, one person's success often felt like another person's failure. Love, she had learned, sometimes came with conditions that no one spoke aloud. I found my rhythm quickly, the words flowing in the cadence I'd practiced. The story unfolded in carefully chosen scenes, the mother's hidden rejection letters, the daughter's guilty triumph, the impossible choice between family and future. I'd structured it to reveal information gradually, to build empathy for all the characters rather than painting anyone as purely victim or villain. 10 minutes felt both eternal and too brief. I could feel the audience's attention, their emotional engagement with the story's conflicts. When I reached the section about the mother's own abandoned dreams, I heard someone in the audience intake breath sharply. I didn't look up to see who it was. In the end, I read, approaching the story's conclusion, Marta realized that love doesn't always look like support, and support doesn't always look like sacrifice. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to carry someone else's disappointments on your shoulders. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is permission to succeed where they could not. I finished to sustained applause, the kind that goes on a beat longer than polite acknowledgement. Professor Choi was beaming. Mateo was on his feet. And at the back of the room, Elena was crying. Not the angry tears I'd seen during our confrontation, months ago, but something deeper and more complex. Camila had her arm around Elena's shoulders, and for the first time since this all began, my sister was looking at me with something that might have been respect. I returned to my seat in a daze, barely hearing the final readers. The story had felt different speaking it aloud, more powerful and more vulnerable than when I'd written it. Sharing it with an audience had transformed it from personal catharsis into something larger, a bridge between my experience and others, a way of making meaning from pain. After the reading ended, people lingered in the hall, chatting about the performances and congratulating the readers. I was surrounded by classmates and faculty members offering praise and asking questions about my writing process. It felt surreal, this academic celebration, this literary community that had embraced me and my work. Isabella, Professor Choi, appeared at my elbow. Exceptional work tonight. I'd like to talk to you about submitting this story to some publications. Really? Really. It's exactly the kind of authentic, emotionally intelligent writing that literary magazines are looking for. There's a contest through the university, the Elena Ferrante Prize for Emerging Women Writers. The deadline is next month. Elena Ferrante. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. I'd love to submit it. Good. We'll talk more about strategy next week. He paused, glancing toward the back of the room. I believe you have some visitors, waiting. I turned to see Elena and Camila standing apart from the crowd, still uncertain, but no longer poised for flight. My heart started racing again as I made my way through the dispersing audience toward them. Hi, I said when I reached them, suddenly tongue-tied, despite having just performed for 200 people. Hi, Camila said back, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. Elena looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and something like wonder in her expression. Your story, she said quietly. That was about us. Inspired by us, I corrected gently. But it's fiction, Mommy. It's not exactly our story, but close enough. Elena glanced around the hall, taking in the academic setting, the literary atmosphere, the world I'd chosen over family peace. This is what you wanted. This is what you gave up our family for. The accusation still stung, but it no longer had the power to devastate me. This is what I worked for, I said, what I earned. And I didn't give up our family, Elena. I refused to give up myself to keep our family comfortable. Camila stepped forward then, surprising me. Isabella, I owe you an apology. I blinked, certain I'd misheard her. I've been thinking a lot since you left, she continued. About what happened, about my reaction to your acceptance letter. I was hurt and jealous, and I took it out on you instead of dealing with my own disappointment. Camila, No, let me finish. Her voice was stronger now, more like the sister I remembered from childhood. I applied to Columbia because you did, not because I really wanted it for myself. I followed your path because it was easier than finding my own. And when I got rejected, I blamed you instead of admitting that maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I hadn't done the work. The admission hung between us, honest and painful and necessary. You deserved to get in, she said finally. You worked harder than anyone I know. You sacrificed for years to make this happen. And instead of celebrating with you, I tried to make you feel guilty for succeeding. I'm sorry. I felt tears starting and blinked them back. Thank you. That means everything to me. Elena had been listening to this exchange with a changing expression, and now she spoke up. I owe you an apology too, Mija. A bigger one than I know how to give. Mommy. No, Isabella. What I did to you was wrong. What I asked you to sacrifice was wrong. I let my own pain and disappointment turn me into someone I don't recognize, someone who would punish her daughter for achieving what she couldn't. She paused, gathering herself. I found your letter, the one you sent after you discovered my Columbia applications. You were right about everything. I was angry at you for succeeding where I failed, and that was unfair and cruel. But I understand why, I said softly. Now that I know about your applications, about your dreams, I understand what my acceptance must have felt like to you. Elena shook her head. Understanding doesn't excuse it. You spent years supporting our family, working multiple jobs, putting your dreams on hold to help us. And when you finally achieved something incredible instead of celebrating with you, I made it about my own regrets. The hall was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers cleaning up, and our family having this long overdue conversation in the space where I just shared our story with strangers. Your writing, Elena continued. The story you read tonight, it's beautiful, Isabella. It's honest and painful and important. You have a gift that I never had, a voice that deserves to be heard. You have a voice too, Mommy. I read your stories in that box. You're incredibly talented. Elena smiled sadly. Maybe I was once, but that time is past. This is your time now. It doesn't have to be either or, I said, thinking about my conversations with Dr. Delgado. You could still write. You could take classes, submit work, find your own literary community. Success isn't finite. My achievement doesn't use up all the available opportunities. I'm 52 years old, Isabella. So, there are plenty of writers who started later in life, who found their voices after raising families. If you still love writing, if you still have stories to tell, it's not too late. Elena looked around the hall again, but this time her expression was different. Not envious or resentful, but curious. Maybe, she said quietly. Maybe you're right. Mateo appeared at my shoulder then, having waited patiently for our family conversation to run its course. Elena, Camila, I said. This is Mateo Rivera. He's the friend who took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Elena studied Mateo with the appraising look she gave all men who entered our lives. Thank you, she said finally, for taking care of my daughter when I failed to. She took care of herself, Mateo replied diplomatically. I just provided a couch, and encouragement, and support, and belief in my dreams, when my own family couldn't provide those things, I added, not to hurt Elena but to acknowledge what Mateo had given me. Elena nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. Well, we're here now, she said. We're trying to do better. I know, I said, and I'm grateful for that. We stood in awkward but hopeful silence for a moment, three women who'd hurt each other badly trying to figure out how to move forward. Would you like to get coffee? I asked finally. There's a place near campus that stays open late. We could talk more. Elena and Camila exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. "We'd like that," Elena said, as we left. The hall together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: wholeness. Not the complicated, conditional love I'd grown up with, but something cleaner and more honest. We weren't the same family we'd been before Columbia, before the ultimatum, before the painful months of separation. We were something new, something that might actually be better. Professor Choi caught up with me at the door. "Isabella, one more thing. There was a literary agent in the audience tonight, Sarah Chen from the Morrison Agency. She asked for your contact information, said she'd like to talk to you about your work." My heart stopped. "A literary agent?" "A very good one." "I gave her your email address. Expect to hear from her soon." I walked out of Columbia that night with my family beside me, and a future full of possibilities ahead of me. The story I'd told had done more than earn applause. It had opened a door I hadn't even known existed. Some nights change everything. Some stories remake the world. Some families find their way back to each other through words and forgiveness, and the courage to start over. This was one of those nights. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own apartment, a tiny studio in Morningside Heights that I can afford, thanks to the fellowship I received after winning the Elena Ferrante Prize. The literary agent, Sarah Chen, helped me place 3 stories in major magazines, and I'm working on a collection about family, immigration, and the complicated inheritance of dreams. Elena and I meet for coffee every other week now. She enrolled in a community college creative writing class and recently shared her first new story in 28 years, a beautiful piece about starting over at midlife. We're learning to be proud of each other without competing, to celebrate success without keeping score. Camila found her own path too. She's training to become a social worker, using her natural empathy and communication skills in ways that make sense for who she actually is, not who she thought she should be. She sent me a text last week. "Turns out I'm much better at helping people than I am at writing. Who knew? Mateo and I are still figuring out what we are to each other. Something more than friends, something built on mutual respect and shared dreams." He's working on his own novel now, inspired by watching me claim my voice. The photo on my desk shows all of us at my graduation ceremony last month. Elena and Camila flanking me in my cap and gown, Mateo beside us grinning, Dr. Delgado, who I invited because she helped me understand that healing happens in stages, Professor Choi, who became a mentor and advocate. We look like what we are, a family that fell apart and rebuilt itself stronger. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the months of estrangement, the painful choice between family and dreams. The answer is always no. That crisis forced all of us to examine who we really were and what we really wanted. It taught me that love without the freedom to become yourself isn't really love at all. Elena still struggles sometimes with my success, but now she talks about it instead of letting it fester. Camila still has moments of sibling jealousy, but she's building her own life instead of trying to duplicate mine. And me? I'm exactly where I always dreamed of being, writing stories that matter, surrounded by people who celebrate my voice instead of trying to silence it. I chose myself, and in the end, that choice saved us all. Some families are born, others are made. The best ones are rebuilt with intention, honesty, and the radical act of letting each other grow. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.